The factory had been quiet for 3 years. The gates still stood, rusted and locked, the padlocks swollen from weather, the chain drooping like an old man's hands. The sign above the entrance had lost half its letters. Only the word steel remained, though no one in town remembered what kind. The smoke had stopped one winter afternoon, and it never came back. No one said goodbye. They just went home and never returned. The wind had carried the last of the gray into the hills, and that was that. But the cat stayed. She lived in the shadow of the main chimney, a thin, crooked thing that leaned like it was tired of standing. Her fur was black once, though now it was streaked with dust and ash. Her name, given by the night guard long ago, had been Molly. But he was gone too, and she hadn't heard it spoken in years. Each morning she stretched on the cracked concrete near the loading bay, blinked at the rising sun, and listened to the silence. The silence here had a sound of its own, the faint buzz of metal cooling forever, the soft groan of air through hollow pipes. She liked it that way. Sometimes a truck passed on the distant road, but it never stopped. Sometimes wind pressed through the broken windows, carrying bits of paper that once held numbers, orders, men's names. The cat would chase them lazily until they tore apart in her claws. The factory still smelled of oil and rain. One evening near the end of spring, a man came walking up the road from town, Thomas Hale, though the name didn't matter much anymore. He wore a heavy coat even though the day was warm, and his boots dragged with each step. He stopped by the gate, looked up at the chimney, and muttered, "Still standing." The cat opened one eye, then the other. She didn't move. Thomas stared for a long time before climbing the gate. The chain rattled once, sharp and lonely in the air. Inside, the dust seemed thicker. The sun through the broken roof panels cast long lines across the floor, cutting through the shadows like blades. Every corner looked frozen mid-breath. He walked toward the old office building, his footsteps echoing across the empty yard. And there, beside the loading bay, he saw the cat. She blinked up at him, unafraid. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Still here." He crouched, knees cracking, and reached out a hand. She sniffed his fingers, then turned her head away, deciding he was uninteresting. Thomas smiled faintly. "Don't blame you. I'm not much worth knowing anymore." He looked up at the chimney. The sky behind it was pale and endless, the kind of sky that didn't belong to any hour. "You used to run 24 hours a day," he said. "Didn't even need to look up to know when it was morning. You could tell by the light through the smoke." The cat stretched, yawned, and lay back down, her tail flicking once. Thomas leaned back against the wall beside her. "When it stopped, I thought I'd go crazy with the quiet." He listened to it now, the stillness, deep and absolute. The kind of quiet that had weight. The cat's ear twitched. Somewhere inside the factory, something shifted. A small sound, like a loose screw rolling across metal. Thomas straightened, eyes narrowing. He walked toward the noise, careful, his boots stirring dust into thin clouds. The cat followed him, silent as smoke that no longer rose. The sound came again, faint, steady, mechanical. He stopped at the door to the old furnace room. The smell hit him first. Rust, cold oil, and time. The room was darker than the rest, only one thin line of light cutting through a crack in the roof. And there, in the middle of it all, was a machine. Not working, couldn't be. But something inside it was moving. A faint vibration, rhythmic, like breath trapped in metal. Thomas stepped closer. "Impossible," he whispered. The machine gave a soft creak, a tired exhale. Then stillness again. He laid a hand on the rusted panel. It was warm. Behind him, the cat rubbed against his leg, purring faintly. He looked down. "You feel that too?" Her tail brushed his boot. He turned back to the machine. The light through the crack caught a line of words barely visible beneath the rust. "Everything that breathes stops." Thomas drew his hand back, stared for a long time. The words meant nothing, or maybe too much. He whispered, "Guess that's true for smoke too?" The air felt heavier now, as if the factory itself had drawn a breath it didn't plan to let go. The cat leapt up onto the cold metal surface, curling into a small circle beside the vent. Her eyes closed. Her purring deepened. Thomas sat down on the floor beside her, the light falling soft on both of them. For a while, neither moved. Outside, the wind rose, faint, uncertain, as if trying to remember its job. It brushed against the chimney once, just enough to make a sound, a whisper. Then, stillness again. The factory didn't breathe, the smoke didn't rise, and the cat, the only living thing left that remembered both, slept beside the warmth that should not have been, dreaming of a sound the world had already forgotten. The second morning broke without changing the light. It was gray, not from clouds, but from the kind of air that forgets how to carry color. The sun tried to rise, but its light fell flat, caught in the haze that hung above the old town and the rusting roofs. Thomas Hale sat on the loading dock, an enamel mug of coffee cooling in his hands. The cat lay beside him, curled up against his coat. Every so often she lifted her head, blinked at the empty yard, and went back to sleep. The factory loomed behind them, silent, still, but not dead. He could feel that much. He hadn't left since yesterday, didn't know why. Maybe because the quiet here felt like something waiting to finish its sentence. He looked up at the chimney. The iron surface had gone black with age, streaked with rust that looked almost red in the dim light. It tilted slightly east, like it wanted to fall but hadn't decided where. He took a sip of the cold coffee and said, "You know, I used to hate this place." The cat didn't move. Her tail twitched once, just enough to acknowledge him. "I worked the line for 16 years, Thomas continued. Couldn't hear myself think half the time. That's what the machines did. They took everything loud inside you and ground it down till it fit their rhythm." He glanced at the cat again. "Now I miss the noise." A faint sound came from inside the building. Something small, like a nail falling. Thomas looked over his shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the same still air and the slow hum in his ears that never quite left after all those years near the furnaces. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his legs, and looked out toward the road. The town was only a few miles south, but he couldn't see it. The haze sat heavy between them, swallowing the horizon. It felt wrong, not like fog, not smoke. Something thicker, quieter. He muttered, "Feels like the air forgot how to move." The cat yawned, baring yellowed teeth, and settled back down. Thomas set the mug aside and started walking toward the main building. The big doors were half open, one hanging crooked on its hinge. Inside, the light turned everything gray-blue, like the color had drained away over time. He stepped carefully through the debris, broken glass, pieces of chain, a rusted wrench half sunk in dust. Every sound seemed to echo too long, as though the building was holding on to it, unwilling to let it go. He stopped at the machine from yesterday, the one that shouldn't have been warm. It looked colder now, dull, lifeless. But when he pressed his palm to it, he still felt something. Not heat exactly, but memory of it, like the surface remembered being alive. He stepped back, staring at it. "You were working last night," he said quietly. "Weren't you?" He crouched, tracing the words on the panel again. "Everything that breathes stops." Something about it felt different this time. Like it wasn't a warning, more like a confession. He ran his hand along the base of the machine and stopped when he found it. A small opening, just wide enough for a cat. Inside was darkness, deep and perfect. He leaned closer, but no sound came from within. No draft, no hum. Just the faint smell of oil and time. Behind him, the cat's claws clicked on the concrete. She had followed him inside. He looked back at her. "You shouldn't be here." She ignored him, slipping past and sitting near the opening, staring into it like it was a doorway. Her fur bristled slightly, but she didn't move. Thomas sighed. "You're braver than I am." He reached for his flashlight, but the battery had died sometime in the night. He cursed softly under his breath. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement, deep inside the dark. A small, shifting glimmer, like light reflecting off something smooth. The cat hissed, low and sharp. Thomas froze. "What is that?" The glimmer pulsed once, faint, slow, steady. He straightened, took a step back. "No," he said quietly. "No, you can't." The light pulsed again, and for a moment the air changed. The stillness broke, not with sound, but with feeling. A deep vibration in the walls, the floor, the metal beams. It wasn't movement exactly, It was more like the factory had remembered itself. The cat ran toward the door, tail fluffed, ears back. Thomas stayed where he was. The machine gave a long, hollow sigh, the kind you hear in your chest more than your ears. A puff of air escaped from one of the vents, soft and gray, and hung in the air before dissolving. He stepped closer, whispering, "That's not smoke." The air settled again. Silence returned, thicker than before. Thomas wiped his palms on his coat and backed away. "All right," he said, forcing a small laugh. "All right, you win. I'll leave you to it." He walked outside, the cat waiting for him at the edge of the loading dock. When he looked up, the sky above the chimney had darkened, just slightly, as though a faint shadow had risen where light should have been. He whispered, "That's impossible." The cat stared at him, then at the factory. Her tail flicked once, slow, like a metronome keeping time for something he couldn't hear. Thomas sat down beside her again, his hands trembling. "Whatever's in there," he said softly, "it's not done yet." The cat leaned against him, purring faintly, the warmth of her body grounding him against the cold air. And as the hours passed and the sky refused to change, Thomas realized something that chilled him deeper than the silence ever had. The smoke hadn't stopped because the factory died. It had stopped because it was listening. The third day felt like time had forgotten this place existed. The light came thin and pale, but it didn't warm anything. It touched the factory's metal bones the way a hand might touch a grave. Cautious, reluctant, already knowing. The world had settled into that kind of quiet that only comes when something is waiting. Thomas Hale hadn't gone home. He'd slept sitting up beside the cat on the loading dock, his coat pulled tight, the ground cold through the soles of his boots. When he woke, the air smelled faintly of oil and rust again, stronger than yesterday, almost fresh, as if the machines inside had started dreaming of work. The cat was awake before him, staring at the open doorway to the main hall. Her eyes reflected the dim light like twin pieces of metal. Thomas rubbed his eyes. "You hear it again, don't you?" She didn't move, didn't blink. He stood, stretching his stiff back. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see what you're looking at." Inside, the light had changed. Dust hung in the air, caught in shafts of pale gold that cut through cracks in the roof. The air wasn't still anymore, not quite moving, but thick, like it had learned how to breathe again. He walked slowly through the corridor, toward the furnace room, boots crunching on debris. Every step echoed, and every echo came back just a little delayed, like the building was repeating him, remembering the sound and handing it back too slow. When he reached the machine, it was different. The vents that had exhaled the faint smoke yesterday were clean now, polished somehow, like they'd been scrubbed by unseen hands. The panel he'd touched was cool, but when he pressed his ear to it, he heard something inside. Faint ticking, irregular, mechanical but uneven, like a heart that hadn't decided if it wanted to start beating again. He stepped back. "You've got no power," he whispered. "You can't be running." The cat padded up behind him, silent except for the soft thud of her paws. She sat beside the opening beneath the machine, the same one she'd stared into the day before. This time the darkness inside wasn't complete. A faint glow pulsed deep within, weak, gold, and alive. Thomas crouched beside her. "What are you seeing?" The cat's ears twitched, and for a moment, he thought he heard something. A sound so faint it was almost memory. A low hum deep in the metal, followed by a slow exhale of air from somewhere unseen. Then, something changed. The walls creaked. The air pressure shifted. Not a breeze, not movement, but the sound of space stretching. The cat flattened her ears, tail puffed out. Thomas whispered, "It's waking up again." He stood, stepping back. The sound grew, soft, rhythmic, familiar. A pattern. He frowned. It wasn't random. It was breathing. The vents along the far wall shuddered, then opened slightly. A hiss of gray air escaped, curling upward, twisting into the dim light. For a second, Thomas thought it was smoke, but it didn't rise. It lingered midair, drifting sideways, dissolving before reaching the ceiling. The cat hissed. Thomas took another step back. "All right," he said, his voice shaking. "All right, I see you. You're not gone." He turned to leave, but the machine let out a single sharp click. Metal settling, or something else acknowledging him. He froze. You know I'm here, don't you? Silence. Then another click, slower this time. 2 beats, then 3. A pattern. Thomas swallowed hard. You're trying to speak. He didn't understand why he said it. It just came out, and the moment he did, he felt stupid. But the cat turned her head toward him and gave a short, low meow, almost like an answer. The machine clicked again. This time, the panel lights flickered. Not on, not bright, just a faint shimmer that rolled across the rust like a dying ember, remembering what fire was. Thomas stepped closer, heart pounding. If you can hear me, why now? Why after all this time? The air moved again. The same faint sigh he'd felt the night before, brushing past his face like a warm breath. He exhaled slowly. You're not running. You're listening. The cat moved toward the machine, rubbed her head against its base, and lay down beside it as if it had always been hers. Her purr filled the space, small but steady. Thomas crouched beside her, staring at the faint light that pulsed beneath the steel. What are you waiting for? He placed his palm on the cold metal again. Beneath it, something shifted. Not gears, not pistons, something softer. He felt it, like the slow rise and fall of a chest drawing breath. He pulled his hand away. That's not possible. The air grew warmer, the light beneath the machine brightening just a little. Dust lifted from the floor, curling like it wanted to take shape. The cat's eyes flicked open. She stared at him, not frightened, just aware. Thomas whispered, It's not just the factory. He turned toward the open doors. The chimney outside was trembling faintly, though there was no wind. Around its base, the ground shimmered, a thin ripple spreading outward like heat on asphalt. And then, deep inside the building, a single sound rang out. Hollow, metallic, final. The kind of sound the world makes when it decides to wake up. The cat rose and walked toward the door, tail high, every step deliberate. She looked back once, as if to say, Come on. Thomas hesitated, then followed. When they stepped outside, the sky had changed. The haze was thicker now, the light heavier. The chimney stood silent, but it looked different, straighter, cleaner, as if it had drawn breath too. Thomas stared at it, whispering, You weren't dead. You were waiting. The cat sat down beside him, tail curling neatly over her paws. A faint wind moved through the yard, brushing across the concrete. It carried with it a smell he hadn't noticed in years, the smell of metal, hot and alive. He looked down at the cat. If it starts again, he said softly, I don't think it'll stop this time. She blinked, slow and patient, then closed her eyes and began to purr. And in the distance, somewhere deep within the factory's chest, something began to move again, slow, steady, alive. The sound of breathing made of iron. That night, the factory didn't rest. The silence that had once filled every corner was gone, replaced by a low, steady hum that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was faint enough to pass for imagination, but Thomas Hale knew better. He could feel it in the soles of his boots, in the bones of the floor, in the soft rhythm of the air. The cat didn't seem afraid. She lay beside the machine again, the one that should have stayed dead, her tail curled tight, purring softly like she was answering it. The two sounds, the purr and the hum, blended together until they became one. Thomas leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the faint glow pulsing under the metal. The color had changed, from gold to something warmer, redder, like the inside of a furnace remembering heat. The air carried a taste of old smoke, though nothing burned. He whispered, You remember, don't you? The factory didn't answer. It just kept breathing. He walked across the room, boots leaving prints in the fine layer of dust that had already begun to shift. The footprints didn't stay. The dust seemed to close behind him, swallowing the marks as if the building didn't want to remember where he'd been. When he reached the control panel, he laid a hand on the lever he hadn't touched in years. The label beside it, Main Ventilation System, was faded, the letters half gone. He'd pulled that lever 1,000 times before, starting the vents that fed air into the chimneys, feeding fire to the great lungs of steel. He said quietly, You don't need me to do it anymore, do you? The hum deepened. The lights above flickered once. And then, from outside, a sound. Faint, hollow, metallic. A groan that traveled down through the chimney's spine. Thomas turned toward the door. The cat lifted her head but didn't move. He stepped into the open yard, his breath fogging in the cooling air. The night had taken on a strange light, the sky the color of tarnished silver, the stars hidden behind the haze. The factory's chimney loomed above him, straight now, impossibly straight, its surface gleaming faintly even without the moon. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw smoke rising. Not black, not gray, but clear, almost invisible, a shimmer of heat twisting through the air. He blinked, and it was gone. He walked closer, stopping at the base. The ground was warm beneath his feet. The bricks vibrated softly, a slow, steady pulse. He placed his hand on the chimney's side. It felt alive. "You were never dead," he whispered. Behind him, the cat's paws padded softly over the concrete. She sat beside him, tail twitching, eyes glowing with reflected light from somewhere deep within the factory. Thomas crouched beside her. "What are we part of now, huh?" The hum grew stronger, not loud, not violent, just insistent, a steady rhythm that seemed to fill the world. Somewhere deep inside, something was spinning again. A wheel, a piston, a breath. Then came the air. It didn't rush, it rolled, slow, dense, warm, low. It came up from the vents, through the open doorways, through the cracks in the windows. It brushed against Thomas's face like a sigh, and for a moment he could almost hear words in it. The cat looked up at him. Her fur shimmered faintly in the light. He whispered, "What do you hear?" She blinked once, slow, and then, from the top of the chimney, a single spark. It wasn't fire, not yet, just light. A flicker. It rose, danced in the air, then vanished, leaving behind a faint trail that glowed before dissolving. Thomas felt his knees weaken. "No," he said softly. "You can't start again. There's nothing left to burn." But the hum answered, low, patient, certain. He looked back toward the open doors. Inside, the machine glowed brighter now, the light spreading along the floor like veins of molten glass. The walls pulsed faintly, in rhythm with the sound. The cat stepped forward, closer to the chimney, as if drawn by it. Thomas reached for her, but stopped halfway. His hand trembled. The air was warm now, familiar, almost comforting. The same warmth he'd lived in for half his life. He let his hand fall. "If it wants to breathe again," he whispered, "who am I to stop it?" The cat rubbed against his leg, purring louder. The hum softened. The ground cooled. The light in the factory dimmed back to gold. And just like that, everything stilled again. Thomas stood there a long time, his reflection faint in the metal. The cat curling once more beside the base of the chimney. No smoke rose, no sound followed. The night settled over them both. He looked up at the sky. The stars had returned. "All right," he said finally. "If you're done, I'll stay a while." He sat down beside the cat, back to the chimney, and closed his eyes. The air was warm where the factory still remembered him. The hum had faded into nothing, but its echo lingered, soft, steady, alive. The cat purred, and somewhere deep beneath the concrete, the earth itself seemed to sigh, as though the last machine in the world had finally learned how to rest.